Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Illuminated Conversation. We're so excited that you're joining us here this afternoon. At least for us is our kind of post-lunch conversation. But these are monthly Illuminated conversations that we hold on topics that are really relevant, that we get curious about or excited to share. And I think this one is very timely. In our pre-webinar conversation, just talking about kind of the shift into new seasons, roles, responsibilities, and just even noticing some shifts in our own energy, attention, and needs both professionally and personally. So excited to jump into the conversation today where we'll talk about that as a leader, as a business owner, how shifting into this season or this new transition poses both some opportunities and some challenges for us here in the Midwest. It's often a time where we get to embrace being outdoors and really enjoying the summer season. And we also know that makes some changes in terms of school schedules, responsibilities, but also as business leaders, fluctuations in the needs of our clients, customers, how we're also supporting team members as they do different things or have different needs, again, both personally and professionally. So, as we get started in the conversation today, in addition to sharing and talking about these things, we always like to introduce you all to a micro strategy, a quick way that we can really shift our nervous system, shift some energy so that we can really be purposeful and intentional as we're stepping into today's conversation. And I was reminded of this exercise yesterday. Donnie and I had an opportunity to do another webinar to a group of small business owners, entrepreneurs, and it's called the pullover. And I've used this already twice today as I was starting my day, as I was getting ready and prepared to step into this webinar conversation to really just clear out some of the mental clutter, the mental to-do list, so that I could really be present and intentional with how I wanted to show up in my day. So with this, I'm going to invite you, if you're in a place where it's safe to do so, go ahead and close your eyes, relax comfortably into your seat. And if you're not in a place where you can close your eyes or don't feel comfortable doing so, just simply find a neutral gaze, allowing yourself to really just stop and come into a little bit of stillness. That pause of quiet maybe even felt like it was 30 seconds to a minute when we're ramped up and constantly on the go or bumping between task and task and task. So I want you to just take a moment to take a breath in and a slow exhale out. And as you're finding that rhythm in your breath, I want you to bring to mind and consider all of the things that you're carrying. That may be to-do list, the things that are on your mind, maybe even physically, the things that you're carrying or bringing to this conversation, or perhaps even some of the emotion. And I want you to place all of that on an imaginary windshield in front of you. So putting all of those things on the windshield in front of you, getting it out of your brain and your body. And take a moment to first just acknowledge all that's there. Again, as we're going from task to things on the to-do list, the next appointment, it can be easy to forget all of the things that we're holding or carrying with us. And now the fun part, I want you to go ahead and turn on that windshield wiper and go ahead and clear the windshield. As you step into this conversation, clear the things that you don't need right now. And for some of us, that might feel a little bit scary. So if you have a piece of paper or a Post-it note, jot down maybe some of those things that you're holding so that you know it's being captured somewhere. But now that you have that windshield clear, I want you to place the next thing you would like to focus in on. Perhaps it's how you want to show up for the remainder of your day. Maybe it's wanting to be focused and engaged in this conversation. Whatever you would like to focus in on, put that on the windshield. And know that as we progress forward in the conversation, as you progress forward in your day, there might be times where those other things find a way back on the windshield or maybe are a little bit harder to clean off. But use that as an invitation to come back to this practice. Pull over, put it all out there, clear what you can, and really step forward with intention and focus. I'll invite you to take in one more breath in and a slow exhale out, really locking in this feeling and practice. And then with that, if you had your eyes closed, go ahead and blink those open. And we'll step forward in the conversation. It's fun to even see Donnie and Megan, your faces at this point and smiles. I feel like that's always a good sign. And even though I didn't get to fully engage in the activity in the same way you all did, like I just noticed a different sense of kind of clarity and for me, a sense of relaxation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Emily. I think it's so important to take these little breaks throughout the day because our windshield can get pretty full pretty quickly. And so even just 30 seconds, 60 seconds
Yeah.
when you think of it makes a big difference. Thank you. That was nice.
Yeah, and for those of you who are joining in and participating today, I encourage you to drop in the chat what you noticed as we took, that 30-second, 1 minute pause to just do this quick activity. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I've done it several times today. This will be now be my third time, and just noting even those collective benefits, the compounding benefits of doing those activities as well.
I found it really interesting that I have the windows open in my office.
Mm.
They've been open all day, but it wasn't until I closed my eyes and did that that I heard this influx of bird song.
Uh,
And that is just a natural nervous system calming sound. So it was wonderful. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that, Carla. You felt present and hopefully are able to be more present in the conversation. But Megan, that's such a great tip. I often will do that even on busy days and just even on YouTube, some of those sounds of birds chirping or some of the videos that I have on my phone, just to play that even
Yep.
for 20 seconds provides enough of that shift.
Yep.
Well, I know many of you have registered, signed up because you're in a similar transition, seasonal shift that many of us find ourselves in, both as professionals and again, as I mentioned earlier, personally, some just shifts to the season, both some exciting things that maybe we look forward to and get to do this time of year. But as leaders, we also know that this can also mean increased workloads, shifts in some of the needs of our customers or what that looks like, or even the clientele that we have, changes in their behaviors, shifts to less structured or more inconsistent schedules. And as people who crave certainty and predictability, that can often be a challenge, particularly in this, but also being able to maintain some of that productivity while we're balancing professional, personal, and other obligations we might have. And so, Donnie, I'm curious, when you think about the research suggesting in these periods of transition and change, there are some of these areas that become heightened during that transition point. Thoughts on why that might be the case, or the things that may commonly come up when we're in a period of transition?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we've seen with COVID and that we notice around some of these transitional periods is um, just around the concept of margin. We all run usually pretty hot. Um, we don't tend to run, at the 50% or the 75% marker. We're usually all in and going and going and going. And then when you add even just a slight change to the system, to the routine or the schedule, everything can start to feel really off balance. And so I think it just comes down to capacity.
Mm,
And when something shifts, that can mentally feel like a lot more than it actually is. That sense of responsibility. I've got the kiddos to consider now and their schedule
yeah.
and all of the narrative that comes with that. They're not always on our schedule or moving as quickly as we are or we'd like them to be. And so um, I think a lot of it is psychological, but a lot of it is also around logistics. But then also, how do you plan for that? You can't move through, the winter months or the regular routine while creating all this extra space just in case,
Mm.
something shifts or you need a little more capacity. Or we don't tend to do that anyways. And so it can kind of push us right over the edge when we're already kind of running
And
hot.
even if we have the best laid plan, we
Hmm.
all know there requires a certain amount of adaptability and flexibility, especially when we add other people to the equation, whether that be team members or for some of us, yeah, with kiddos at home or in
Hmm.
new activities.
Well, I
You
think
know,
going back to what we talked about yesterday too, when the nervous system gets taxed and we have that extra psychological burden, we become much less flexible
mm.
and much more rigid. And so things even, continue to feel different as we're going through these adjustment periods.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And last September, we did an illuminated conversation about kind of the back to school transition and some of those changes. And Megan, you brought up just a really great definition of the mental load, right? The things that we're carrying or juggling um, mentally, cognitively, and really how that could have an impact. Hoping you could maybe share some of that again, just as a reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the term mental load, while it might be a familiar term, is probably often interpreted because it is both cognitive effort, but it's also emotional effort. So it's cognitive and emotional effort that goes into the planning, the organizing, the scheduling, the coordinating. And while again, we might have some predictability to that or find some sort of rhythm with that during a certain season, um, weather related or otherwise, of times in our lives when those seasons shift, so too does the mental load shift. And it, depending on the number of people in our family system and in our team dynamics and our workplace systems, that's a lot of cognitive and emotional energy going towards figuring out, now what does planning look like, now what does organizing look like, now what does scheduling look like, and to have to reorganize all of that. um, and that can lead to a significant amount of stress
Yeah.
because our brains are wired to provide us with predictability and safety. And when we don't have that predictability, it can create a significant disruption for our nervous system, which we like to think about as our operating system. And so that gets pulled in new and different directions, making the carrying of that mental load that much more challenging.
I think that's a really important reminder, Megan, because yeah, I often think about that in terms of the cognitive load and the things that we're holding, but also the emotional weight that comes with that. And we're also balancing some of that situational leadership or
Yeah,
emotional intelligence. What do other people need from me? What does this person need from me? How am I balancing all of that in addition to the other things?
yeah.
I'm wondering, Donnie or Megan, from then an energy perspective, if we think about the way in which our nervous system likes to operate when we invite in these different cognitive or emotional demands, how does that really impact our energy?
Hmm.
Danny, as you're thinking, I'll just jump in. I think a visual that's helpful for me is to think about um, mental load as like the number of tabs we have open metaphorically in our
Mm,
brain. And so just like our computer's operating system, if we just have one or two tabs open, the browser's happy, right? It can move quickly, it can do the things it's supposed to do. But some days, if you're like me and you have upwards of 25, 30, 40 tabs open, things slow down. Processing speed literally slows down. And the same is true for us as humans. It's that we have this many tabs open, and it's going to create some disruption and decrease the amount of energy we are holding, because we have so much energy out there just maintaining the number of tabs that are open.
That visual just reminded me of, I sometimes get the reminder from my computer of like memory overload or being used too much.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if there's a human equivalent to that kind of an indicator. What might be some of those warning signs when it might be helpful to reduce some tabs?
Yeah, the visual that I like is when they talk about RAM on a computer, Emily, is the kitchen counter. Like this is how much stuff can fit on your kitchen counter. And then when you're, if you're cooking and you don't have a place to set down, you set your stuff down or do your work, you're like, and it's kind of that same internal feeling of like, it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think what we see from research on kind of mental load and energy is that there are a few things that make carrying that mental load so energy draining. One of them is this piece about the number of tabs, right? It's kind of always running in the background. The second is that it's often invisible. So we're doing it all in here, and other people might not necessarily know how much we're doing in here. And it often lacks closure, so it's never done. And so those three things can not only increase our levels of stress, but decrease our level of energy. So when we think about, to your question, Emily, like strategies for that, it's always running in the background. So is there a way that we can make it visible for ourselves? Like you had us do at the beginning with the exercise. Do you have just a Post-it note? Take those things out, close that tab, put it somewhere else where it's visible. And that leads into that piece about it often being invisible work. Are there ways within our family system, if we're transitioning the schedules at home or our workplace environment, what are ways that we can make some of those invisible efforts more visible? Not to be like see how much I'm doing, not in that way, but here are the decisions we need to make this week. Here are the kind of key priorities for the week, whatever that is, to make it visible. And then to try to figure out at what point does it end, or does it make sense for us to pause so that we can really just close out the system and reset.
It's also making me think about this idea of expectations.
Yeah.
So we know that expectations are needed, but I think this, as you're describing, we can often get into this pattern of unstated expectations, unvoiced expectations, or unrealistic expectations, and how that can really be a setup for failure. And so I'm wondering what might be some recommendations in terms of how we effectively manage and communicate expectations in these types of transitions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, going back to what you were saying, Megan, with all the tabs being open, it's such a subjective process because for some people, putting that on a sticky note might be the answer, but for other people, it might be just more clutter. And so coming up with different, different whether it's activities or processes that work for us. I have something that works well for me, but probably wouldn't work well for others, and that's just planning out tomorrow with the family at a really high level. And that way, that helps my nervous system come down. But I know that doesn't work for everyone, and so trying to look at the issue from the perspective of there are solutions. There are ways to make this even just a little bit better. And what are they? That can be, yeah, having a scheduled time to connect with family and chat through, or open conversations, or sticky notes, or whatever that looks like. But I'm curious, Emily or Megan, what do the two of you like to use? Any tools or tricks that you use to help with scheduling and expectations?
I think for me, a big piece of that and what you're sharing too, Donnie, it's not just about having the plan, but it's really co-creating it. I think where
Mm,
I've
hmm
maybe run into challenges in the past is when I have an idea of how things should go, it both in the workplace or at home as we're kind of navigating schedules, and in the absence of communicating those expectations and or making people a part of that. So I think about people who maybe um, in their households have older kids where it can be this conversation of here are some of the things that I need to get done, or here's a priority for the week. What does that look like on your end? And not just always being
hmm
about business, but how do we want to have fun together? Or as a team, how do we want to come together and maybe do some different things? So I think for me, it really comes down to communication because there's a
hmm
lot that can live up here. And in the absence of communicating that, it can not go as smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
Absolutely.
That's huge. What's interesting too is I think what I've tried to do both personally and professionally with home and work teams is really to kind of think about expectation management in terms of how are we going to define or redefine success.
Mm.
Um, and that involves kind of naming the shift, right? So we are in a different season, right? School's out, or business is ramping up,
Mm.
or business is ramping down. Whatever it is, name the shift.
hmm
So it's not up here, and you're not wondering, are other people thinking about the fact that there's a
hmm
does anybody
Is it
else
just me?
notice that this is
Yeah.
hard all of a sudden? So being able to name that and then to kind of redefine, yeah, what does success look like? Whether it's like, what does tomorrow look like? Or what would a good week look like? But to be able to kind of create smaller increments and manage expectations within those during these times of transition, I think can feel much more manageable and help reduce some of that uncertainty, like you were talking about, Donnie. Just having that conversation, what does tomorrow look like, helps to kind of calm the nervous system.
hmm
And in a lot of ways, what you're describing, Megan, is kind of as a collective team pulling over
Yes.
hmm
Yes.
and being able to redefine. And I would say as our Lumen Group team, I think we're pretty intentional. I mean, we preach a lot of what we practice internally, but that's a really intentional part of acknowledging, hey, we're in a transition. We had some stated goals, projects, things that we're moving towards. Is that still realistic and doable?
Mhm.
What might need to shift or change, or even just having the conversation of naming, hey, I have also these other things that are now different compared to maybe what our regular day to day might look like.
Mhm.
We talked earlier about this idea of having some good plans. We can have conversations around maybe an ideal state, how we'd like the day to go, or some of the priorities. Thinking about in terms of strategies that might help when it doesn't go that way or there's disruptions to the plan, because again, I think that can be another way that our nervous system gets a bit tripped up when we're not careful.
Donnie has his thinking face on, so I'm giving
Well,
him.
I was just going to say, for me, and I think generally speaking, if we can find ways to slow down inside a little bit, I think that um, I I always quote, I don't remember who says it, but planning is essential and plans are worthless. So keeping that kind of in the back of my mind as you go through your day. But yeah, I mean, you get thrown off track all the time, and things happen. And it's kind of that internal pace. If I can
Mm.
manage that by, breathing or pulling over or stepping back and seeing the big picture, I feel a lot better. And realizing, when you look at, there are different consequences for different, issues that arise. If you miss an important meeting, that's different. But, than being late for your day at work. So trying to get an objective perspective, and that happens. And I think going back to Megan, what you were talking about, having that conversation, what does success look like? Or Emily expressing your thoughts openly to the family. We really have to slow down
Mm.
and step back to be able to do that. We have to manage the pace in order to create a little bit of margin to have those effective conversations. They can't happen on the fly. They have to be intentional. And I think going back to what we always talk about, our nervous system is going to be the loudest voice in the room. So if we're really stressed out and trying to have an important conversation around, the change of season, we might not be as successful as we could be if we were more centered.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I would I would add just kind of both on the self part of this, the personal part of this, and then more of the dynamic part of this. I think potentially a helpful strategy for individuals is to really try to figure out like what is your what are your anchors? Like what are your
Mm.
non-negotiables? So regardless of whatever else may happen, I'm going to have breakfast with my son and I'm going to read a book to him before bed, right? And if I can do those two things at a minimum, I've been successful. I've blocked my calendar. I prioritize in such a way these non-negotiables are met. Right? So I think it can be helpful to think about like what are those anchor points for yourself individually, so that you can have those as areas of focus. And if some days amidst the chaos, those are the two things that get done, or those are the two things you feel like you're able to say, yes, I made that work, then that's great. And both, I think, on the personal side and on the family side, we talk about a lot about micro strategies. So those are strategies we can do for ourselves for regulating our nervous system. Of course, those are going to be helpful right now, but I kind of like this idea too of micro check-ins, like just popping in saying, hey, what's working for us this week? What's not? What do we need to adjust? So whether that's a conversation with a kid, a partner, a team member, a direct report, just those kind of quick check-ins so you can recalibrate, because transitions require a lot of recalibration.
And I also think what a great skill to model to those around us as a, a team leader with our direct reports or colleagues at home, for even our kiddos to see, okay, it's all right to take a little bit of a timeout pause and just check in what's needed. Do I need to shift my energy or do something different in the way that I'm showing up or how we're engaging with one another? Yeah, that's a really helpful reminder, Megan.
Yeah.
What have we missed in the remaining 2 minutes? If we have questions from folks that are hopping on here, or Donnie and Megan, last sentiments you want to leave people with today?
I'm waiting for the chat. I know it takes longer for people to type than to speak, but I think, a lot of what we talked about here, because we like to bring psychology, biology, neuroscience into everything that we talk about, and how we work. And so I think kind of bottom line, when we're talking about transitions in seasons and some of the unpredictability that can bring in, it's really helpful to just acknowledge that our brains don't like that. Our brains don't they don't like uncertainty. And so it's going to feel uncomfortable, and it's going to feel potentially overwhelming, and it's going to feel, from a biological perspective, threatening. And so that's going to use up some energy. So what are the things that we can do to, a lot of the things that we've talked about here are, what can we do to reduce, kind of reduce the focus, think about, what are my non-negotiables? What are the priorities? Who can I have conversations with to help get on the same page? What does tomorrow look like? Some of those things to really help balance that energy and reduce that mental load that can drain so much of our energy in the background.
I think an important part of that, Megan, is just normalizing that because it's a challenge doesn't mean I'm failing or that I'm not doing it correctly. It's just that that's our brain making adjustments
Yeah.
to the change that's occurring.
Yeah.
And earlier today in another client engagement, you mentioned this idea of giving ourselves a bit of grace, giving others probably also extending some of that grace outward in kind of these seasons and moments where we are in a period of change or transition, that it may take a little bit for us to find our new rhythm and groove with one another.
Yep, absolutely.
Donnie, any last words you wanted to share?
I don't think so. Yeah, self-compassion, giving yourself some grace, knowing, wrapping your head around having that shift in expectation that things are going to be different during these transition periods and as we go through life, and that's okay.
Well, this last slide we'll leave you with, if you scan the QR code on the left, that will pop you to a document with a handful of micro strategies. So some of those things that you can do in between interactions when plans shift and you need to be a little bit flexible and patient. Some of these quick strategies you can use in those moments. But so appreciate you all joining us here today. If we can be of help in any way, don't hesitate to reach out, get into contact with us. But we look forward to seeing you all at the next Illuminated Conversation in July.
Take care, everyone. Thank
Take care.
you.